We've got people still trickling in, but why don't we get kicked off? So hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I'm with the Mixed Panel team. And before we dive in and I let all of our amazing panelists introduce themselves, I'm going to cover a quick housekeeping notes. So if you have any questions throughout the session, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen within Zoom. We'll be taking those questions live at the end of the session. This webinar is being recorded and we'll send out the recording within 24 hours. So if you miss anything, don't worry about it. It's coming your way. And then lastly, if you do have any technical difficulties, there's a couple things you can try: exiting and re-entering. You can also use the little caret icon next to your mute button at the bottom to change your audio settings, or worst comes to worst, you can always join us by phone. So, right, I think that covers everything on the housekeeping side. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Matt and our panelists to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Charlie, and thanks to everyone for joining and welcome. It's a pleasure to be talking to you today. So my name's Matt Simpson. I'm the Managing Director of Candy Space. We're a business that design, build and optimize digital products. I'm going to let Elle and Stu introduce themselves as we come to their bits, but Elle's one of my colleagues from Candy Space. Stu, we're very pleased to have, is head of product at ITV Hub and one of Candy Space's clients, and we're going to be talking to him a bit later. But let's kick straight into it. So yeah, this is about how traditional businesses can keep pace, potentially learn from the people that are disrupting their sectors. And we're going to run through the rise of those disruptors, some discussion around how we think traditional businesses can meet that disruption and keep pace. Elle's going to talk through some good examples of where traditional businesses are doing that. As I said, we're going to have a chat with Stu after that and leave a bit of time for Q&A. So let's begin. So the rise of the disruptors. And look, I'm starting with this quote from Jeff Bewkes, who at the time was the CEO of Time Warner, talking about the threat of Netflix about 11 years ago. Now, I don't ever want to be too sort of smug about people who've made predictions that are catastrophically wrong, because I always think there but the grace of God go I, and certainly I wouldn't want anyone digging out quotes that I might have made in the past about what's going to happen in the future. And yeah, it's a dangerous game given the pace of change. But I'm sort of thinking that Jeff himself is being a little bit smug about Netflix, so I don't mind sort of pointing out that in 2021, it is, as Jeff says, a little bit like the Albanian army has taken over the world. And what we're seeing is those disruptors like Netflix taking market share off traditional long-standing businesses pretty much across any sector. And just to give you some examples of what that looks like, PayPal's now bigger than all the Wall Street banks except JP Morgan, who I imagine are looking pretty nervously in their rearview mirror. Airbnb is now worth more than the 3 largest hotel chains combined. And actually, as an aside, it's not just the travel sector who are being disrupted by Airbnb. It's actually also the finance sector, because a lot of people who would more traditionally have been buying finance products to fund their retirement are actually looking to just renting out rooms in their property. So the disruption is happening everywhere. And what of little old Netflix? Well, Time Warner is actually bought out by AT&T. It's currently being dismantled in a sort of last-ditch attempt to counter the threat of Netflix or the Albanian army, as Jeff said. And you know, I could go on and on with these examples of disruption, and perhaps a good lens through which to view this, and for anyone who's in a sector who hasn't been as disrupted as some of these examples, is to think, look, what if one of the tech giants comes into your sectors? What would that mean? What if Google tried to open a chain of pubs? What if Facebook started making aeroplanes? What if Apple started making, I don't know, apple juice? What if Amazon went into healthcare? So sort of slightly facetious examples, but the last one did actually happen. So a couple of years ago, Amazon sort of pretty casually announced that they were considering launching healthcare services for its employees. And literally within 2 hours, it wiped $30 billion off the market value of the top 10 health and pharmacy companies. So the impact of those guys coming into your sector is pretty massive. And, you know, understandably, many traditional businesses are struggling to adapt to this unprecedented disruption, the unprecedented pace of change. And what that looks like in this slightly apocalyptic image is that even at the current churn rate, it's expected that half of the S&P 500 are going to be replaced in the next 10 years. So value is massively migrating from those traditional businesses to the digital disruptors. And the key phrase is at the current churn rate here. In fact, it's likely to be even more of a bloodbath than this. So the businesses that survive are the ones that are likely to take radical inspiration from those disruptors, to learn from them, and to focus on what we're going to talk about today. I think 5 key attributes or characteristics of those disruptors that need to be imbued into the traditional businesses to keep pace with them to thrive. So we're going to talk about speed, imagination, freedom, customer centricity, and the importance of data. So let's kick off with speed. So look, this type of stuff just blows my mind, essentially. I love this quote, that we're not going to experience 100 years of progress in this century. It'll be more like 20,000 years of progress. Or to put it another way, we're using faster tools to design and build even faster tools, and so on and so on. So technology is increasing exponentially in terms of its pace. And not only that, we're at a point in history where all of those exponentially accelerating technologies, so blockchain, AR, IoT, VR, nanotechnology, biotechnology, robotics, I barely even understand some of this stuff, but they're beginning to converge, and that is creating an incredible pace of change and incredible challenges for all businesses. So to survive, those businesses need to sort of embrace the type of speed and agility that's been natural to the disruptors as the drivers for success in this exponentially accelerating world. And, you know, of course, we need to talk about the pandemic, and that's thrown an even sharper focus on the need for speed. And there's nothing that speeds up digital transformation, I think, than literally having no choice but to do it. So, you know, businesses have rushed to bring new D2C offerings to market, new services, new digital products, new ways of working. And according to this survey of digitized activities, you know, 20 to 25 times faster than they previously thought possible. So things are accelerating at pace. But as I say, this is something that I think comes pretty naturally to the disruptors. And I love this story about Amazon, that in the very early days of Amazon, Jeff Bezos insisted that every single internal team had to be small enough to be fed by 2 large pizzas. So this was obviously a boost to local Italian takeaways, but also had the effect of ensuring that Amazon could operate at speed, because smaller teams meant basically getting more things done without that sort of bloated structure around them. But most importantly, it meant that they could scale at pace, because adding new teams didn't require more internal structures. And Elle's going to talk us through a nice example of a traditional business that is doing that.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, I'm Elle. I'm a senior UX designer at CandySpace, and that means that I work all the way from product strategy and customer experience and research, all the way through to visual design and information architecture and things like that. And I've worked trying to solve problems for human beings in digital for the last 10 years. So this first case study is a particularly great one, because Levi Strauss is a well-established, long-established company that launched into an incredibly accomplished, fast pace of adaptation during COVID. Their response to the pandemic took place in the physical as well as the digital world, and was multi-pronged in each space. In May of 2020, nearly a third of Levi's online orders were fulfilled directly from their existing stores. And that's because they had turned their existing stores into micro fulfillment centers, which was great because it meant they could keep their staff working and keep their stores open, make use of that existing overhead, and also move through inventory that would otherwise just be sitting there for an unknown amount of time. So by June of 2020, their online sales were up 70% year on year. And they actioned a number of other initiatives very quickly as well. They launched a virtual concierge service, which allowed customers to have one-to-one interactions with employees. They enabled customers to make purchases through TikTok and Instagram. They hosted nightly concerts on Instagram. They used AI to drive a 4 times increase in sales during a particular e-commerce promotion that they ran. And they also supercharged the personalized features available to people in their application to reward loyalty, and download rates for that doubled in the second quarter of 2020. So it's a really impressive assortment of initiatives. But I think what ultimately makes it a great response to a crisis or to change is its focus on customers, both in service and culture, and also the speed of their response. And in what they've done, you can discern their design thinking methods and behavioral data analysis. What they've done here is ideate broadly and experiment quickly and just been bold. No hesitation there at all. They've gone where their customers have gone. They've diversified to new uncharted places and focused on not only alleviating barriers and anxieties that can get in the way of remote sales, but also elevating that experience and making it even better. They've obviously been using their analytics and interviews and research to understand what makes people less likely to buy something like a pair of jeans online. Things like wanting to be able to try it on and get that fit just right, ask questions of someone in the store and the store experience, and they've grabbed hold of that with both hands and moved it to digital. So they've understood why people would try to visit a shop instead of online, and then solve that with things like their concierge service and one-to-one contact with staff. And they've done all of this at record-breaking pace.
Thanks, Elle. And yeah, I really love that example because they have acted with great speed and agility. But I think what they've also shown is imagination, and it's an important point to consider. So, you know, if businesses only focus on upgrading technologies and speed in terms of their digital transformation, like it's not enough. It takes more than that. It takes a sort of fast-paced reimagination of business models. And it's something obviously that the disruptors have put at the heart of their success. So look, I've pulled out 9 different disruptive business models here. There are clearly loads more, but digital marketplaces like Uber, freemium services like Spotify, sharing economy or access over ownership models like Airbnb. And I think traditional businesses, as Elle's going to come on and talk about, who are able to think differently about how their business works and launch these new business models, are the ones that are at the forefront of trying to meet this pace of change and meet the disruption that's happening to their sectors. Elle.
Great, thank you. So the Rolls-Royce that I'm talking about here is the world-leading maker of aircraft engines, a huge business based in Derby, Singapore, Indianapolis, all over the world. So we partnered with them as a kind of in-house startup. And through our research, we recognized some unique opportunities, which were problems we felt we could solve industry-wide. So we ended up helping them to define and build this new business model. Some of the industry-wide problems that we identified were things like the fact cross-sector decision-making is only made in person every 6 to 12 months at big meetings to which people have to fly. And off of those sorts of meetings, there was a serious lack of follow-through. We also found that regardless of what type of business they were in, there was widespread use of archaic software and problems around fragmented back-end legacy systems. There was also a common failure to launch innovation projects in-house. And most key of all, this is a sector that possesses an enormous, but actually largely untapped wealth of data. So together with Rolls-Royce, we responded with Yakova, which is an open platform to facilitate the sharing and monetization of data and digital solutions across the whole of the aviation industry. Yakova enables industry professionals to collaborate and communicate and solve problems together. They can join data rooms to share data and create APIs. They can incubate new software, and then they can bring it all to Yakova's own marketplace. And then the marketplace itself connects small vendors that would otherwise not be able to reach out to these huge businesses, vendors of small but excellent pieces of software and new APIs, things that big businesses need that would otherwise overlook. So we managed to launch the alpha of Yakova in just a couple of months, and Yakova then received £13 million in partner funding for its ongoing development. Post beta, Yakova now boasts over 850 company members across the globe, including professionals from airlines, OEMs, airports, and other industry players. The reason why we think that this matters as a case study is because it's an example of a really traditional, hierarchical and slow-moving business successfully disrupting the status quo with a valuable new solution and with imagination. And I think one of the stirring things about this is that if they can do it, frankly, anyone can. They were bold and they stepped outside of their business to partner up with people who think differently to them. They recognized that they perhaps didn't have the right kinds of tools and resources in-house to do that. They founded their decisions on research and insights rather than opinions or internal pressure. And we were then able to demonstrate to the rest of the aviation industry that disruptive, innovative solutions could indeed be launched rapidly, but also built on firm foundations. And finally, because it understood from its research that silos, slowness, and a lack of appropriate collaboration were major issues, and that there'll be things that will be the death kiss of business in the future, Yakova was already in a position of strength and resilience when the pandemic hit. They didn't have to react, they were ready.
Thanks, Elle. And yeah, it sort of brings us neatly on to the next point, because one of the ways in which Rolls-Royce were able to do that is by creating a structure that sat outside their sort of traditional business to be able to do that. And that's the sort of freedom that I'm talking about. So it's not something that comes naturally to traditional businesses. As it says, they're built on a sort of bedrock of cautious stability. So, you know, in the 20th century, success was measured by things like, you know, the number of factories you had, the number of staff you had, assets, and the sort of rapid innovation that's brought so much success to the disruptors is pretty alien to those businesses. And it's hard, you know, with the best will in the world, those ingrained processes, cultures, mindsets, systems are not going to change overnight. They don't budge easily. And there's sort of a fear as well. There's a fear of change. The challenge is where that fear resides is where the disruptors see opportunity. And I think nothing better illustrates that for me than the way the London black cab sector tried to meet the disruption being caused by Uber. And this was in 2014. They did it quite a few times, but instead of looking at their own business and seeing the value that they could provide, they just basically did a lot of protests. So their protests tended to be blockading central London. And essentially what that did was annoy everyone. It meant everyone couldn't get anywhere and drove them to signing up to Uber as a quicker way of getting around. So yeah, meeting that change, embracing the fear, seeing the opportunity is critical. A sobering thought, however, is that even though, you know, most executives want to do that and recognize the need to change and recognize the need for that rapid innovation, most of them believe that they haven't got the right resources internally or the expertise to be able to pursue that growth. But where businesses are able to do that is where they've established innovation hubs or in-house accelerators or digital teams that sit outside the shackles of the existing infrastructure or processes or systems. And the ones that I think are performing best are the ones who are given the fullest freedom. So the ones who have the freedom of technology stack, talent, processes, they're the ones likely to run the fastest.
And on that point, only 4 years after setting up its innovation arm, AB InBev has made over $1 billion in new sales. And it did this by creating ZX Ventures, which is an investment and innovation outfit. So they seek out great ideas with potential, and they can provide all sorts of things that entrepreneurs lack. They use their expertise to develop these new products and services, but then they can provide scale through their existing network of partners, manufacturers, and distributors. Crucially, though, they were housed in a different building and they had their own separate business functions like HR and finance. So they were really separate. In short, they had freedom. They had the freedom to move fast and decide quickly, the freedom to experiment and fail and learn and then succeed. And so far, ZX Ventures has been behind the launch of a beer delivery app, Z Delivery, vending machine Beer Box, and a number of new brands, including low alcohol canned wine Saturday Session. And they also invested heavily in what are now very famous and successful brands like Camden Hells. So in order to achieve speed and allow creativity to thrive, AB InBev recognized the need to get out of their own way, essentially setting up a separate business in a separate building with a clear mandate and the ability to make its own decisions. We've recently been conducting our own research into the workplaces and companies of the future. And in addition to this kind of freedom, their way of working already has some of what we think are essential components for future business success. Firstly, their manufacturing and distribution is decentralized and arranged as a smart network of brains rather than a linear supply chain. Amongst other things, this means that they're more resilient and adaptable. And we think that companies of the future are likely to need to shift to network structures in other ways too. Secondly, they know who they are and why they exist. And ZX Ventures was actually born of a trainee asking the CEO in a training session, what would the world miss if this company didn't exist? And he didn't have a good answer. So that sparked something of a crisis of identity and purpose for the company, one that they worked hard to resolve. And their purpose now, bringing people together, is central to all they do, alongside valuing freedom in innovation.
Thanks. I love that question. It's one we should all ask ourselves. What would the world miss if our company doesn't exist? Customer centricity. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? We're living in the age of the customer. Buyers are empowered like never before in making their purchasing decisions. You know, all the research that's done around this shows that now customer experience is more important than price, than product, than brand in terms of loyalty of customers and purchasing decisions. And it's something that the disruptors really have put at the heart of their businesses and is at the heart of their success. So the absolute obsession with customers. And look, there are loads of disruptors who do this really well, but I particularly am impressed with the way Slack do it. So the way they develop their product is always based on sort of ongoing, constant, real-time customer feedback. And the way they measure their success is customer metrics like NPS, daily active users, and that's how they assess their success and grow their business.
And we spent time conducting rapid but large-scale user testing with Mazda owners and prospects. And this exposed key areas for fundamental improvements in user journeys on their website. We actually mapped the entire customer journey across every channel, from socials and advertising, video, their main website, all kinds of things, to show how channels and content interacted or perhaps didn't, as the case may be, and what data was theoretically available. And that program of work allowed us to optimize their site UX and also ensure consistency of quality of experience across all digital touchpoints. As a consequence, we reduced bounce by 50%, increased finance conversions by 55%, and improved dealer locator conversion, which is one of their key metrics, by 39%. As we all know, the pandemic has rapidly accelerated various shifts to digital. But in the case of Mazda, how could a company with high value physical products like cars, assets that rely heavily on in-person reviews and test driving and things, adapt to this situation? How could Mazda best serve its customers now with cycles of lockdowns and reopenings and social distancing? It presented us with a number of challenges that required rapid action. Car purchase often begins with months of research and graduation between different mental modes. And that became our focus. We optimized the site to foreground research elements and car configuration, as well as brochure downloads to help get us onto their mental shortlists and the future booking of test drives. So in addition to dramatically reducing bounce, boosting finance contacts and other conversions, Mazda's customer-centric thinking has proven fundamental to its surviving and thriving through this most challenging of times.
Thanks, Elle. And of course, the last point is data. So I could have used one of 100 different quotes here. Data being the new oil seems to be the favorite in presentations like this. But I use this one because it reminded me of my early days of work. I started life as a journalist on magazines. And for some reason, magazines at the time sort of actively eschewed any data or customer research on the basis that the people producing the magazines knew much better. So we didn't have any data. And I specifically remember a conversation between an editor of mine and a senior exec at the company, basically saying that he refused to do any customer research because readers don't know anything. If they knew how to put together a magazine, they'd be the ones in here, London, doing it. They should trust our judgment and let's not go down that route. So the magazine industry is on its knees, so take from that what you will. But I doubt there's anyone on this call who would not subscribe to the sort of value of data. And of course, but saying that you want to drive your decisions by data and actually doing it are two different things. And it's hard, it's complex. And, you know, traditional businesses are typically in a position where they have massive different piles of data in different places, joining it all up, dealing with first party data for the first time. It's really hard, and it takes probably a massive program of data engineering, but that shouldn't mean inertia. So the reason, look, I'm really happy that we're talking alongside Mixpanel is that product analytics tools like Mixpanel are really, really powerful in allowing businesses to understand why customers are engaging, converting, how you retain them. It's really fast. It allows businesses to really rapidly identify how they can improve those experiences, drive customer value and inspire growth. But as this quote says here, that's not enough alone. That power and the value of that can't just reside in the hands of a small group of analysts alone. It needs to be exposed across the whole business. And again, why a self-serve tool like Mixpanel is really, really powerful, because it empowers people to be able to self-serve, to get those answers, to gain those deep insights into customers in real time that can really help power those decisions.
Great. So our final case study is for Mars Pet Care, which had multifaceted business needs when we first got in touch with them. It knew that from its existing research that it was missing out on revenue and market share because it lacked the intelligent, personalized experiences that consumers now expect as standard. It's the owner of several major pet food brands, and it knew that it needed to evolve into providing services in addition to manufacturing physical products, services that would help it to create meaningful connections to existing and new customers alike, thereby opening up new revenue streams and access to a wealth of mission critical data and insights, data of such quality that it could actually inform strategy and product development across many Mars businesses. So the services that it wished to build centered on pet health and well-being. Pet wellness is a universal, pervasive pain point for pet parents, as they call them. They are often reliant on trial and error, even when working with a vet to solve problems. Furthermore, the size of the opportunity in this still emerging sector amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars across gut, skin, oral, mobility, and more. So we partnered with Mixpanel to imagine and craft an app designed to be a beloved companion to pet parenting, an app that would continuously learn, predict, present tailored results and recommendations, and remove that guesswork for pet parents. And it was our vision that this app would be in the pocket of all pet parents across the globe. It would be that essential and that valuable to them. So we worked at speed and took the product from initial ideas to alpha in 12 weeks. The reason that Mixpanel was so crucial to this piece of work was that not only does it allow you to spot potential hang-ups and problems in user journeys and behavior and things like that. As a UX designer, I particularly love it because it helps you to get to the why behind that a lot faster. It helps you to troubleshoot and problem solve and get to insights that you can actually rely on and make decisions based on much, much faster. You can hook up custom journeys, you can filter things really easily, you can do all manner of things that frankly leave stuff like Google Analytics in the dust. So it was really helpful and the perfect fit for this kind of endeavor for Mars. So this project to us was the perfect example of finding that sweet spot between business needs and human needs. It was a whole new model for Mars. And the variety, breadth, and depth of data that it can now gather means actionable insights for Mars businesses. It means new revenue and a trust-filled long-term connection with its customers. But it's something that's going to be successful because it's responding to real human needs. It empowers pet parents with knowledge, reduces anxiety, and enhances well-being.
Thanks, Elle. So in conclusion, look, I'm not going to make any predictions of the future, unlike Jeff. I don't know what the world's going to look like in 5 years, let alone 10 years or 15 years. And as an aside, I think if anyone tells you they're going to future-proof any of your products, then view that with the right degree of suspicion. But what I do know is that, you know, the businesses that are going to thrive will need to continually adapt. And if they can do so across these areas, you know, with speed and agility, with the imagination to think about new business models, the freedom to work outside of the existing processes and infrastructures and technology stacks, with that relentless focus on customers and always informed by data and insight, then those are the businesses that are likely to thrive in this crazy, exponentially accelerating world that we live in. At which point I'm going to ask Stu, and come out of here, to tell us how that's working across ITV. So Stu, thanks so much for joining us. Do you want to just briefly explain your role across ITV and what you're doing there?
Yeah, sure. So I'm head of product for the ITV Hub and Hub Plus. The role and my team kind of really just focusing on the customer experience. So it's really in line with what you've just covered in the deck previously. Our kind of ideals are built around trying to give the customer the best experience they possibly can within VOD. So that's what my team do. Thanks,
Stu. And look, ITV has clearly been disrupted by Netflix, who we talked about, but Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, other players. How are ITV adapting to that disruption?
I think it's interesting because disruption in the VOD market, you know, has really been around for years now, and Netflix has really pioneered the way ahead for us. It's so easy to kind of look at what Netflix are doing and think we need to emulate, you know, their success. They've got a different business model to us, as have Amazon and Disney Plus. They don't have the ad market to contend with as well. If we asked our customers what the biggest issue they faced, they'd come back and say adverts. So it's quite difficult for us to really try and alleviate that customer pain point. And we have done with the likes of Hub Plus. That's why that exists, $3.99 to watch ad-free ITV content. But we've got different challenges to how they've got their challenges. So we're looking at innovation in spaces around, personalizing advertising and using data to try and drive the experience of ads in the same way that we are trying to drive the experience of content as well. So whilst we look at them as disruptors in the VOD space, we're also looking at seeing who are disruptors in the ad space and how can we try and learn from them as well.
Great. And look, we've talked a lot about speed, how particularly your product teams across ITV Hub, how are they able to operate with speed and agility? And is there anything more you think you can do?
Yeah, I mean, there's always more, right? It's always a question about resourcing and trying to use the resourcing in the most intelligent way you can. What's often a challenge for us is we often have to try and resolve issues on the fly. And so because it's a very complicated world, video on demand, and the customer experience is at the very kind of last mile, if you like, of a very long road that's preceding it. And so all the content is being streamed all over the world. We're trying to capture that stream, we're trying to encode it, we're trying to make sure we have the right DRM on that stream. This is all before we get to the customer playout. So what we're trying to do as a product team is make sure that we focus on two separate things. One on the customer experience, making sure that we have the right attention to detail on that, and the other on the platform itself. And by decoupling them, what we're not doing is trying to fix complex kind of real world problems with the likes of AWS and asset management and encryption with customer focused product teams. So by decoupling them, we're able to focus on what's important and make sure we have subject matter expertise on those areas. To answer your question, the kind of acceleration rate really comes down to the size of the teams then. If we doubled in size, tripled in size tomorrow, we could probably find work for them to do. Would the return on investment be there? That's difficult to measure because a lot of it is intrinsically linked with customer data. And so we need that feedback loop to be in place first.
Yeah, that makes sense and goes back to some of the things Elle and I were talking about in terms of the sort of freedom of product teams or different teams working within the organization. Like, how does that work in terms of how your product teams work into the bigger ITV business?
It's interesting. I think there's certain companies in the world right now that are kind of blessed with not having to go through a transformation. And, the acceleration of companies like Netflix have really come from not being tied into a traditional system, if you like. For us, we've got to try and balance between subject matter experts who understand linear world of television. The people who commission television today, they've come from a linear traditional TV background. So what's quite difficult, and I've experienced this when I've been at the likes of the Telegraph as well, is you get a very traditional company like ITV or BBC or the Telegraph, and they've got their expertise in creating for the Telegraph, a very physical product. And so it's trying to kind of have the conversations with, it's not so much non-digital people. Everyone kind of understands digital to their own degree. The challenge is really trying to put it into terms and language that are kind of symbiotic. Telegraph is probably a better real world example. We're all familiar with the headline on a newspaper. How does that headline on a newspaper convey to different sized tablet screens or a mobile screen? But you're having the same conversation with the people who choose the headline. They're not choosing that headline specifically for Android or choosing that headline specifically for, a 12-inch iPad. So it's trying to have the right conversations with people, I think, is been the key for me when working within a digital transformation organization, to say, actually, we're having the right conversation, but we need to try and find a kind of common ground language to be able to have it. And that's the challenge for my product teams. How can we find that common ground language to try and make sure we are talking and trying to, strive for the same thing? So that's the real key for me as I see it.
That makes sense. And sort of following on from that, you touched on it a bit, is how are you ensuring that the way you evolve the ITV Hub really is in line with your understanding of customer desires and behaviors?
Yeah, so we're kind of blessed with really great customer insight. So I've not worked anywhere before where we've actually physically spent a huge amount of time gathering customer feedback and information about what they perceive the reality to be. And I want to say perceive the reality to be, I'm sure we're all familiar with the adage that, you know, customers will say what they do, but they actually do something quite different on the platform itself. And so whilst we're blessed with that customer insight at a very kind of quantifiable, qualifiable level, what we don't necessarily have is some of the data points that match back to what the customers are saying that we do as well. So we've kind of, you know, we've been speaking to the likes of Mixpanel and trying to better understand how we can use services out there to try and better understand our customers. We are going through a huge digital transformation piece within data as well at the moment. So it's not just about looking at our competitors from a video on demand space and an advertising space, but also how are people using data. And so, you know, just based off what you've been saying previously this morning, I think it's really, you know, the really good examples about if you do use the right data and then you do marry that up to the customer experience, what you've then got is the complete picture. So I'd say for us at the moment, we're in a transition of having really great kind of customer insights and trying to get to the point of having also really great data points. And we do have them, but they don't necessarily align at the moment. And we need to try and find ways that we can join the dots together on them.
That makes sense. And the final one was sort of imagination. So I guess without breaking any ITV sort of corporate secrets, like, are you thinking about new models? Are you reimagining the way ITV connects with audiences in any way?
I think the challenge is always twofold, isn't it? It's always, you know, we've got competitors in our space that are galloping ahead because that's what they're focused on doing. And they've been focused on this for 10 years. You know, ITV's hub has been around for probably the same amount of time, but it's not always necessarily been our key business focus. The ad market has dictated that, you know, the TV linear advertising is kind of far outweighing that of digital. As those kind of balances start shifting, the focus suddenly becomes back on our product as the hub, you know, to try and how can we actually start making even more revenue from this product. The challenge then is that our competitors, like I say, they're kind of galloping off in a direction that's not been tethered to linear television, perhaps. So I think it would be a mistake for us to just look at the likes of Netflix and Disney Plus and say, well, let's emulate their successes. Let's see what they've done and do that as well. I mean, that's quite easy to do because every week they're seemingly bringing out a new feature, a new interaction, a new platform to consume their content. What we have to try and do, I think, as a business is look to some of the other disruptors in the marketplace. The likes of TikTok is a really good example of a video platform that's commanded a huge amount of attention from a key demographic, but it offers something entirely different. It offers user-created short-form content. And Netflix, and Amazon Prime, and Disney Plus don't necessarily do that. So is there something in that to say, if the same demographic who are watching Love Island are also the same demographic consuming very short-form content very rapidly for kind of potentially hours on end, how can we then try and see if there's something that matches up those two models? And can the hub be a centralized place for something like that? I wouldn't ever suggest, you know, that we have a TikTok-esque service, but short form rapid content might be something that we can do. Consumer generated content could be something that we could do. And so they're the areas that I think it's important for us to not discredit just because they're not what Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney are doing as well.
No, that's interesting. And it's about staying true to what the value of ITV is to its customers, but trying to learn from a broader range of disruptors, and not just trying to emulate what Netflix or Amazon Prime are doing. That makes a lot of sense. Is there anything you think you can learn from them, not necessarily in terms of the services or business models, but ways of working or anything else that you can bring into ITV?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think for us, the shift we need to make is to get faster at making rapid attempts, and, you know, fail fast is the key mantra. I think this is one of the issues with transformation, is that failure doesn't necessarily have a home in lots of places, because you've got a traditional business that have overcome, you know, they've crossed that chasm, if you like. And so failure doesn't necessarily ladder up to actual successes in the future. And so I think it's that paradigm shift of trying to understand that failure isn't necessarily a terrible place to be. Like, for example, if we lost to the stream of ITV Hub, that's a catastrophic failure. We've lost huge amounts of ad revenue. It's very hard to experiment in that place. But I think you've got to try and find those opportunities to. I was at Betfair for a year or so, every race you would generate close to £1 million from. How do you experiment in a place where a race can actually generate that much money? And you can't become a victim of your own successes. So I think that the challenge is to try and find those, potentially, you would probably traditionally call it R&D, where you can experiment and you can fail, but they have to have this kind of way of bringing themselves into production at some point. So for us, I think it's trying to find the safety net and make sure that safety net is in place to do that rapid experimentation and testing as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, it's one of those things that's easy to say, isn't it? Fail fast, but if failing means losing millions of pounds of revenue in the space of 20 minutes, then you need to consider that carefully.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, we work with Candy Space obviously really closely, and the relationship has always been very good. And it's always difficult. You know, you guys are always coming to us with ideas for experimentation and things that we could do differently. But what's hard is trying to then manage the stakeholder expectation. There was actually a question in the chat I noticed from Josh, which talks about balancing speed and quality. That comes into this again, right? Because I think stakeholders, my stakeholders or my team stakeholders are a combination of, so let's say digital marketing, traditional marketing, digital commercial teams, digital commercial teams. There's all this kind of blend. And so when we're trying to balance that speed and quality, we've got to try and make sure that the quality perception is something which people kind of understand. And so we talk about MMP and MVP often, but the actual MVP solution isn't necessarily the quality expectation of a traditional, or someone in a traditional business, but it is the expectation of someone in a digital business. So how you try and balance them, I think it's a good question, because it's almost like you can never really find that perfect sentence or perfect sentiment that aligns every single stakeholder. I think it's more of a one-to-one relationship, and the transparency in the language you use is probably varies depending on who you're talking to. You know, less information can sometimes be more powerful than more information to other people. So I think that's where that's kind of how I address that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, that balance of speed and quality. And I think, you know, as you say, it comes down to a process, a proven process around, you know, testing, learning, iterating, getting things in customers' hands as quickly as possible, and using the data we talked about to inform what happens next.
Yeah.
There's another question for you, actually, that's come in. Do you link user journeys between digital and TV, or do you see them as separate experiences? So how closely do the VOD team work with the linear team to track across all platforms?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think there's two schools of thought. One is that we should do more of that, and the other is that we should do less of it, right? So there's the people who want to do more see it as a you know, there must be a relationship there between people consuming linear television and then carrying on watching that service. What we don't have at the moment is obviously the ability to log into a linear TV. And so on average, about 1.4 people will watch a stream in the evening. So if we see a user or Sky give us some kind of transparency about viewership, it's often from the home. And so we have to try and put a incremental uplift, because it's never really just one-on-one relationship. I mean, kind of 8 o'clock at night, you can kind of expect there to be more than one person watching that TV in the living room. So we roughly kind of bottom out around 1.4 people on average watching per every living room in the UK who's watching ITV. The mapping then, it becomes very difficult, because what we're observing is that the home probably has could have, let's say last night's a good example, a living room watching the football and a bedroom watching Love Island. How you kind of join those two experiences together is kind of impossible unless you can log in from a linear TV, or you're using our owned and operated app. But lots of people watch Sky, lots of people watch Virgin. So to answer the question, we want to try and find that common denominator between the kind of linear household viewer and the digital viewer, but we have to make a lot of assumptions to do that right now. There are the kind of technologies that are coming in which can help that. So there's a piece of technology called HBB TV, which is basically a web front end on a linear experience, which comes about from being able to do IP over TV over IP. So you can kind of enable your television to have that web interface. Those technologies will help us get better at this. We still use the traditional BARB measure for how many people are consuming television. And That means that we kind of have a box in a certain amount of homes across the UK, and we listen for adverts being played out. Sounds very analog, but actually, it's been the bedrock of TV for a long time to measure how many people are actually consuming content. And so to try and look at how that can replicate in a digital world, might need to go a step further to try and understand about user behaviors in a household. I think it's very difficult. And I think for the time being, it's about assumption making and trying to just interview and speak to enough people to try and understand their behaviors so we can make a kind of educated guess about the usage in a household.
That's great, Stu. And perhaps one more question for you. Dare I ask, have you got any predictions about the future of TV? And I should warn you, this is being recorded. So
yeah, no, I think ITV are going to dominate for the next 20 years. No, I'm just over 40 now, right? And so I've been consuming television myself for pretty much my entire life. I've got 2 young children, and our behaviors as a family have massively changed. My kids they watch lots of Netflix, they watch lots of YouTube. We subscribe to both of those services so they don't watch any adverts at all. They don't even know what an advert necessarily is. And so my oldest is 10 years old. Come Christmas, when you're saying, what do you want for Christmas? They've got no idea because they're not influenced by the ad market. And I think the prediction, if sort of trying to see how that plays out in the future, I can only see the kind of increased subscription services, coming in. I think we're in a very fragmented market at the moment in TV. What really is helpful for people is aggregation of content. So understanding where content can be found. I think Apple TV have given rise to basically just searching for a title. You play that title, you may not even know where the source of that title is coming from. And I think we're in a really kind of, rapidly growing market. We've got lots of US competitors who are coming into the TV space as well. Google and Amazon are both kind of creating, their own televisions, their own kind of TV viewing platforms potentially. So it's only going to get more fragmented. And so I think the aggregation is going to become even more important to people to find out what they want to watch. Like, I'm a big advocate of watching the US Office. It hops around between Netflix and Amazon Prime. I pay for both of those services. All I need to do for my Samsung TV is to know I have access to one of those services for it to recommend it as a piece of content to me. I may never actually know I'm in that operating platform. So I think there is going to be a swathe of kind of, it's going to feel a little bit aggregatory like, if that's a word I've just made up probably, because someone's going to come along and go, we can put all this content into one theoretical bucket, and we can make sure that you're served the content that you want to watch, providing you've got access to that service. That all said, I do think there's kind of probably a TikTok clone competitor out there that's probably waiting in the wings, because, given the dominance of that platform and success of it, I think it's probably been very isolated, and the competitor market for it is going to grow as well. So I think that short form content is going to rise.
That's great, Stu. And yeah, you didn't mention the Albanian army, so I think you're pretty safe with those predictions. It's fascinating talking to you. We could talk for a lot longer, but we're running short of time, but really appreciate your insight.
No, thank you. Thanks for your time.
And there's one more question probably that I can take, and then I think we're done. So a question from more of a product analytics angle. How do you overcome cultural challenges with senior stakeholders that might not have seen or understand the benefits of product analytics? I mean, it's a great question, and it's a challenge we're facing at Candy Space, because the instinct may be that this is just another tool that we need to put in. We've already got Google Analytics, we've already got this, we've got that. Like, why do we need another tool? And actually, despite my magazine heritage, when my eyes were opened to the power and the sophistication of product analytic tools like Mixpanel, it really made me think, why wouldn't you have this? And I think being able to trial those benefits, so really understanding how customers are behaving and using that insight to help optimize and drive the actions that you as a business want people to take within that product is so powerful. So I think, being able to demonstrate that through some sort of trial or experiment to demonstrate the return on investment that you can get from that, I think is the way to try and do it. But yeah, it's a really, really powerful tool. I think that's all the questions. I think we're about running out of time. So Charlie, shall I hand back to you?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This is great discussion. So we are about out of time here. For everyone attending, thank you so much for your time. We'll be sending a recording out within 24 hours. And if you do have any other questions, we would love if you got in touch on LinkedIn, on the Mixed Panel community to continue the conversation. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone. All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Bye.